Welcome back to Two Pentecostals and a Microphone, Season 2. Can't believe we finally are back. I am so glad to be back, and I believe I can speak for Jared and say that he is as well. We're very excited to start Season 2, and we're starting with the new year, so Happy New Year. 2019. We made it through 18. It was a good year. A lot of changes, as you heard in episode 0. Hopefully you listened to that. And I'm looking forward to unveiling this next episode to you with Brother Carlton Coon. It was a wonderful conversation that both Jared and I absolutely enjoyed to the uttermost, because it was a great conversation. Now, I do need to say one thing about it. We recorded on our end a phone conversation, but it was through internet video. So there are a few spots in it, maybe a little bit more than a few, that are a little bit glitchy. And there was just no way around that. So we still want to release this episode, and we're pretty sure that his message gets across pretty well. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you stick around for the rest of it for our Season 2, Episode 1 on Two Pentecostals and a Microphone.
Welcome to Two Pentecostals and a Microphone. I'm Jared Mize.
I'm Bryce Kyle.
And on the line today we have Brother Carlton Coon, who is, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction here and I'll let him take the rest of it, but he was Director of North American Missions, I believe, for over 10 years, and is an author, blogger, now a podcaster, and is pastor of Calvary UPCI in Springfield, Missouri. Brother Coon, welcome to our podcast. Let me know if I missed anything there, or feel free to fill in on your...
Well, that probably covers more than enough. It's good to meet you, Jared and Bryce. And that opportunity, I guess today it's three Pentecostals and a microphone.
That's right.
Yeah.
For at least a few minutes.
Well, it's good to have you on. Now, you're in Springfield. How long have you pastored there?
This adventure has been about 3.5 years, so it's kind of a new endeavor. I mean, from some, I suppose my first pastorate when I've been in it 3.5 years time, but the truth of the matter is that in the context of pastoring, that number of years is very, very short, actually. So they're getting used to me and I'm getting used to them, and we're making some progress. So
great. So what is it how would you describe yourself? So you do a lot of different things. Would you describe yourself as...
Well,
I'll let you fill in the blank.
I think in some ways I see myself as a bit of an adventurer. I like to do things that have never been done, and tackle projects that maybe some look at and say, well, that can't be a star. Maybe nobody's ever thought of it. And somebody said that leadership is not always showing people totally a new way, but it's kind of spinning the paradigm a little bit, where that people are forced to look at a situation from a different perspective and maybe find new solutions to it. And my wife and I talk about it pretty often, that our life together, our life has truly been an adventure. It's never got boring. And as is true for all adventures, there's a pioneer analogy. There are days when wheels come off the wagon. so to speak. And then there are other days when you find gold in their heels. And so it's just, but it's always, I cannot imagine living just a boring life. And of course, I think in simply serving God, if we'll be open to his leadership, we'll be honest with where he guides us, that he's not really a very boring God if we give him a chance to guide our lives. And so that probably is, when I wrote a first book, people who were advisors, they said, well, I don't know if that'll work or not. And then the second one, but I went ahead and did what I did, and here 24 books, I guess it is, later, it seems to be rolling along pretty good, So that probably defines it in a lot of ways.
I like that. I think we're probably kindred spirits in that,
well,
in that way. Because Right. Yeah, and I think sometimes I probably make my wife uncomfortable because I do tend to step out and do things I probably don't think about enough, maybe ahead of time, or nobody else has blazed the trail yet. So, but it is an adventure. You're right.
Well, and I want to mention to you, because I'm very excited to be here with you. I see it as a great opportunity, and I'm thankful for the work that you're doing, and you're being trailblazers in this regard. You've offered counsel to me and advice in setting up my own podcast. And as I looked over the array of things that you've tackled on your podcast a while, I feel like today, Crane compared to prime rib or whatever, because you've tackled some challenging topics, and I think that's neat. So I commend you and appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that was kind of our original intent. We were more. I felt like there were no real good apostolic Pentecostal podcasts other than just preaching and just people recording their sermons on and putting it out as a podcast. And I wanted to do something where we just have discussion. And I thought it was kind of. I suppose you're right. We are trailblazers. So.
I guess so.
That's the format where most of us do our best learning, is in a question and answer type setting. I know that as a pastor, I use them almost every week in my teaching, that I allow people the opportunity to ask questions. But I'm pretty comfortable saying that. And if you have to know everything before you'll allow anybody to ask questions, you're going to be pretty limited in the occasion that anybody ask a question. So I like what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate you being on the podcast today. And I did subscribe to your podcast, actually, Ministry Mondays, which just launched. And are you looking, this is maybe a little getting ahead of myself, but are you looking at launching another podcast in the future?
I envision doing something that's similar to. I have, while I was working as a religious executive, I started into people getting the job done who nobody knows, and my observation is that number of people that we label iconic, they're heroes. They're people that we hear often at various events. It may be a camp meeting, it may be a conference, but we hear those same voices. But when you go past the surface of that, we have hundreds and hundreds of people who maybe they don't have the right pulpit presence, maybe they don't have the right polish, they don't have the right veneer, whatever it is. But at the local church level, they're being incredibly effective in growing churches, building churches, winning new people. Right. And some of the greatest churches we have in movement are led and have been led for decades by people who are virtually unknown. And so my goal again is kind of to give that a platform and to encourage people who may not, there are very few of us who are super preachers. Very few of us who can stand in front of an audience of 2 or 3 or 5 or even 1,000 people and pull it off. But especially when that audience is primarily preachers. But there's so many people who are just getting it done that we've not heard their voice, and we need to hear from them, and we need to learn from them. So, and I see it running the gamut, not only of my own church organization, but all of those born again with the water and the Spirit, and it's kind of like what you've shared with me about your experience with the podcast. The people already plugging in to what I have on iTunes run the gamut of both location, and they run the gamut of church affiliation. And so my goal is to, I want to hear Johnny James talk about how he prepares his unique sermons. Now, again, that's kind of an iconic name as a preacher from the Pentecostal Assemblies of the world, but I want to learn from him. I may not be able to apply it, but I want to learn as much as I can from him. I want to learn from people who are in the church or Jesus Christ, called the Cool JC, as well as from the United Pentecostal Church, because I think there's much to share.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we do get to divide or separate, maybe not so much divided. Sometimes it is division, but sometimes it's just separated out into our own little group, and we miss out on a lot that we can learn from.
I totally agree.
So we have a few questions regarding leadership, regarding pastoring specifically, but just in general. First, let me ask: what do you believe is the biggest challenge for growing the church in North America now?
Well, you certainly qualify when you use the word North America. The first, I think, is we have to find our field, and we have to recognize that the field is white, ready to harvest, but it may not be the field that fits our comfort zone. Jesus encouraged his disciples to look to the fields that were white. And it's interesting the context that he did that. It was with his conversation with the woman at the well in Sychar. Well, the disciples had just been they'd gone to buy groceries. They had not seen the people of Sychar as an evangelistic opportunity. And so came back with groceries, but they came back with no converts. While the lady went to town and she saw her community as people who needed to experience what she'd already encountered. And so she brought the entire city back with her. I think that particular thing in North America, number one, we have become very culturally diverse. That's not as true for where you live or where I live as it is for the vast majority of North America. We have what I call the arriving generation that is going to be the immigrant population, and we have to seize that opportunity and be intentional and be strategic about it. Our college campuses are fertile fields of opportunity, our military bases. And again, in this particular era of time, there are no fields. We may have places where that there are large churches in relatively small cities but the truth of the matter is that is that the people who are in their 20s and 30s and teens and many times even their 40s have not experienced, have not encountered, have not had the opportunity to encounter a Pentecostal revival. So we need to see the feel. And then secondly, I see a big challenge in that churches become comfortable and we as leaders become comfortable, and we lose our focus on both evangelism and disciple making, as well as what I call multiplication. The book of Acts, I believe it's chapter 9, talks about, and the churches were multiplied. Well, there comes a time when the church being effective multiplies both its leaders, and we send preachers out, and then we also are raising up a. I think keeping that focus, it's easy to lose focus in whatever you're doing, and keeping that focus and measure in front of us. Are we evangelizing our community? The people we win as converts, are we making them into disciples? And then are we being effective helping preachers and preachers who we send out to preach the gospel to the lost? And again, we have places where that's happening quite well. We have other places where we become comfortable. Well, there's 200 here Sunday, or there's 75 here Sunday, and the bills are all paid, and the lights are on, and if they want what we got, they know where we're at. Particularly,
right?
What Jesus wants us to be doing.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think that leads to our next question, really. I see the church a lot of times, and just in the few years that I've been involved in the apostolic movement particularly, it seems there's a lot of focus on either or. There's a lot of focus on evangelism, getting people in the church, getting them, baptized in Jesus' name, filled with the Holy Ghost, evidence and speaking in tongues, and then we just send them on their way. There's no real discipleship, or we focus a lot on discipleship and not so much on evangelism. And you had a really great blog post on the systems of church growth.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed reading that, and you talked about disciple making, and you had some really great ideas on classes that churches can be involved in. And I think you mentioned your book that you've written on it. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
I think there are churches and times when we have, we write up in the Herald and Perspectives and other magazines of various organizations. If the church that you guys are part of, if you have a revival in the next 3 weeks that has 250 born again, that may get written up somewhere as a word.
Yeah.
But nobody steps back and asks the question a year later, now, of those 250, what's happening with them? So we don't, in Pentecost, we're not strong on evaluation. We're strong on celebration. And so you have to have both. My own strength is probably oriented toward disciple making, but if we never make any convert disciple, then that work's not going to be done. I use a term, and I actually use this with a series. I think I taught about this for 42 different months. I had a deal while I was at headquarters that was Mission North America as a webcast, and I did 1 week. I did a session on leadership. It came out weekly, but I did a session on leadership, and for 42 weeks, I believe it was, I dealt with something that I call the apostolic continuum. A continuum is a progressive unfolding. It's an evolving of a thing. You can say happens at this point. We went and we picked pears off the fruit tree, but in order to arrive at that particular day, in order to arrive at that particular time, there is an ongoing process that has brought it to that point. And you really can't segregate from one thing to the next. You have to understand that without all of these things being there, then there's not going to be the fruit to be picked. The processes that I see, and we can kind of in our minds, we can segment them. Number one is we have to be, and when I say this, I think that every effective church needs to have these things going on an ongoing basis. And you can't say, well, we're just going to do discipleship or we're just going to evangelize. The first step in this thing, the apostolic continuum, is evangelism. Are we impacting our community? We even know we're here? How are we reaching for the lost? What's our visitor count in our church? What to increase the visitor count? And then secondly, of the people who visit for a first time, how many of them come back for a second visit? There could be a breakdown there. I read, I was actually at Pentecostal Assemblies of the World Missions Conference last week as a presenter, and one of the guys at that meeting said that the data shows that 80% of the people who attend a church for the second time will be that church. Well, so now the goal is not just have them come once, but let's do what we got to do back in the door. Okay, so that's part of evangelism. Then with evangelism, there is conversion, and we see them born again. After conversion, they're a spiritual baby, and we have to mature them. That's disciple making. Well, part of the whole paradox of this is that many of the people many who we convert, actually begin the disciple making process before they're born again. They've come to church. Probably happened with you, Bryce, because you were coming to church. You were already being, this wasn't a sudden thing. You were being discipled and experience before you ever really had the experience. So your life began to change.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
But discipleship is intentional, just like taking care of a baby in the home is intentional. And we have a 2 granddaughter. Well, you put when Elsie Adara was 6 months old, you could have put the best prime rib in the world in front of her, and she'll starve to death. Well, we could do the same with spiritual babies, where the is good, the teaching's good, but it's not what they need, and so somehow we have to provide that. Okay, so you have the continuum. Okay, now we go beyond that, and my contention is if the body of Christ is truly a body, and if we're building fitly framed together, there are no extra parts. Everybody needs to have a ministry. So how do we now, again, part of the continuum, got this convert, how do we involve them in ministry? How do we engage them? What are their motivational gifts? How do we get them participating? Okay, so now we've taken them through a process where they find out some of that. Okay, all those who are converted and become involved in ministry, a much smaller group of them, God is gifted to be leaders. Okay, so what are we doing to train leaders? And I heard John Maxwell say one time, probably 30 years ago, I heard him say, you can turn anybody into a leader. And I sat in that meeting and I thought, you can't either. You know, I agree with what you're right, buddy, but that one you're off on. And I sat in another seminar recently where he had backed away from that position because there are inherent things that have to be part of the way a leader thinks. And it's just part of God's makeup. You can certainly improve the skills that God has given. Leaders are not born, they're made, yes, but there has to be some inherent capability. Then the last thing, and this is even a smaller group than the group of leaders that we're developing, is the group that we will develop to become preachers of the gospel. And so all of these things, evangelism, conversions, disciple making, involving the new person, training, ministerial training, should all be happening on an ongoing basis. So I understand that there are churches that segment and very, what I see is there being a focus more on, I see more of a focus on evangelism than I do on disciple making. That seems to be where the baby gets dropped most of the time. So a long answer to a short question, I guess. Hope it made, in a rambling way, some sense that this whole concept of the continuum being ongoing should be the way we focus our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. That's always been my biggest concern, I think, was how do we, I mean, it's awesome that they have received the Holy Ghost and they're baptized, but how are we progressing in their lives and maturing them? So, yeah, wonderful ideas.
And I've seen it growing up. I grew up in Pentecost, and I've seen it throughout the years, over and over and over. Somebody, first-time visitor even, maybe go to the altar, get the Holy Ghost. And it's amazing and it's exciting, and then nobody knows where they went the next week.
Yeah. And that's, I think the whole shift came from me when I heard a friend of mine pastors a great church in the deep South, and let's see, 35 to 40 years ago, they had an incredible 1,000 received the Holy Ghost in a matter of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or whatever. And then a year later, to Stan, who had been converted in that revival, and much to his dismay, one person stood. And that church, under his leadership, began to immediately shift, not away from evangelism, but to begin to give attention to developing the converts that they had won as what they had been given, totally focused on evangelism.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. In some of the churches I've been a part of, I would say that was probably the most obvious problem is the over focus on evangelism at the expense of.
Well, and some of that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. My church, or the church you guys are part of, might well be celebrated and an article be written if 200 are born again. But even if a year later only 2 of those people remain, we don't ask the hard questions, but we don't celebrate the fella across town who had 10 receive the Holy Ghost in the process of a year, and a year later 7 of them remain.
Right.
Yeah. So what gets noted, what gets celebrated gets repeated. And I think sometimes we celebrate the wrong things.
True. Wow, absolutely. That's a very good point. So, what do you see as a pastor? What do you see as being the major pain points for pastors in this current climate? That's a great answer. I can only imagine.
I'm kidding. I love the people I pastor, and I've always enjoyed them. And I am by nature an introvert, so I have to work at the social part of this. But there's a lot of us who that applies to. I had the unique opportunity to be away from pastoring for 12 years and then return to pastoring, and stepped into the pastor of a congregation that was an old church, however, not average in size. Average in size is somewhere between 70 and 80 people on a given Sunday, and that's churches of all stripes across North America. as we have begun to minister and as we have begun to win some new people and disciple some new people, what I see as the greatest challenge is that we're living in a very low commitment society, and with the great intent for life change, and I'm going to become a strong supporter of the church. I'm going to make sure that my children are in church service going forward. I want my kids to, and this may be people who were raised around the church or making a return. I want my kids to have that influence, and so they make that declaration, but then the follow through is not there. And I think some of that is simply indicative of society these days. There's very little brand loyalty. There's very little corporate loyalty. My dad was hired and worked for the same company for 30 plus years, I guess. Very few of my peers and very few of my son's peers will have that same experience. And so the loyalty factor, and then the other thing that I've been thinking about this for a long time that I think plays into people are overcommitted. And whereas in my upbringing in the rural South, we had limited options of things to do. But the people I'm pastoring these days, he works 2 jobs. She works jobs, full-time student. They're raising 4 kids. Well, the kids have music practice, drama practice, soccer, and the list goes on and on. You know, the grass has to be mowed, groceries have to be bought. And so we're our time's overcommitted. I made the observation that I think people would rather give you $100 than to give you 60 minutes because time has become more valuable than money. And so there's several things we're going to have to do. I think, number one, we're going to have to adapt a little bit, and we're going to have to give smaller bites and bits of truth in mediums like what we're doing here today, and then using Facebook, Twitter, all of the social media that will unfold across the future. How would Paul be using those tools to develop and disciple people? How would he be using them to evangelize a new community? Those are things I think that we have to think about. I've mentally have engaged for a long time in this concept that I call future church, not just where will church be in 2018, 2019, but 2040 toward us in an incredible hurry. Well, the world that I'm pastoring in today is different than the one I began pastoring in 1990. So again, how do we, and what I see so often is that we're fighting rearguard actions. We're cursing the future as though it's darkness, but it's not darkness, it's the future. It's the way it's going to be. If God wanted me to have done ministry in the 1950s, I'd have been born in the 50s. So I got to do what I do within the moment in time that I'm living in. And I'm not sure society I'm in is going to adapt to going back to having old time revivals that met 7 nights a week or 6 nights a week or 5 nights. I think we're going to have to adapt, unfortunately, maybe to where this world is at. So I don't know, again, a long answer to a short question, but I see this just across the board. And when I talk with pastors, this is what their observation is as well, is that people are overcommitted and people are challenged to make an additional commitment church, and even when they do make the commitment, it's not a very lasting commitment. It's kind of like,
unfortunately,
do we buy a hamburger at McDonald's today? It can change from day to day.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting you brought up what the future of church will look like, and I've actually had a conversation with my pastor, Pastor Arrowwood, regarding that, and we do our services on Facebook Live now, which has seen a lot of interaction and people. I actually have a family member of mine who's not been in a church since he was probably a teenager, and he's in his late 50s, or actually probably early 60s, and him and his wife, my aunt and uncle, great aunt and uncle, they watch our services periodically, actually fairly often, on Facebook Live. And I don't know if they would ever walk into a church. Maybe they will someday, but that is something that they weren't connecting with before. So
I think using the medium creates a comfort zone. You can sit and watch it in pajamas, and you're getting used to the speaker's voice. You're deciding, does this guy make sense? This arriving generation of young people are not going to be won, nor will they be appealed, not for the long haul, with simply entertainment. They want substance.
That's true.
And if in 5 minutes of a video, 3 minutes of a video, and again, I'm probably taking too long with my answers, but I've signed up for several video-based courses lately. And it's interesting that the longest any of those segments will be about 16 minutes. And the sweet spot, and I read about the spot, is 3 to 5 minutes. And so I'm going to do some adapting of some do in disciple making and put together 3-minute, 5-minute, 7-minute clips that bring home one point and then leave the person to work through it, because I think we have to adapt.
Absolutely. That's incredible. That's something actually I spoke with Pastor Airwood about as well, is a video. We've talked about a video series of short videos that would actually be available on our website, or would be available probably also on DVD or something for new converts. So we have a new convert class, but we also have these things in place for discipleship.
I think we have to do both. We can't stop one, but we have to.
Right.
We have to offer different tracks of providing, always headed to the same outcome. But my son's planting a church in Georgia, just north of Atlanta, and was just there visiting. An interesting observation. He said that the people and his folks are all new converts. He has maybe families who have come, none that have transferred membership, but some who were backslidden away from God and that sort of thing. But he said the people who had no Pentecost are much easier to get committed than the ones who are returning or recycling or coming back to God. They treat the church, they treat their relationship with God as a casual thing. So if it's convenient to be there, good. But if it's, picnic time, we'll do. So that's an interesting component that I think is accurate as well.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think that is? That there's the difference there between totally new converts and then
I think many people who backslide never have the right foundation with, and so they come back, and I've tried to get backsliders to act as new converts who know little, but they already come knowing stuff, and often what they know is the wrong stuff. Maybe it's a misapplication. for many of them, disciplines of Christian living about this is the way I'm going to live because I'm a Christian. Their mindset about it is realistic, as opposed to having a good biblical foundation as to this is why I do this. It's not just what my church, but this is the biblical expression. I'm in my life, I've chosen. So when a discipline is on church tradition and not on biblical foundation, it's a very brittle thing, and it's easily. And then I also think that often backsliders simply cannot quite comprehend grace. And so they're always inundated with their failures.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think a lot of apostolics, and I think when we actually interviewed Pastor Arrowood on the podcast, he mentioned this. A lot of apostolics never learned because we focus so much on other things that, and at the expense of grace. A lot of apostolics never really learned that grace was there. And a lot of people will just, I've messed up. So that's it. I might as well just leave.
And that's, but we do see that. We do, people throw in the towel and or they come to church, but they feel unworthy both to be blessed and they feel unworthy to serve. And so if you've got who are on the team, but they don't even feel comfortable being the water boy at the end of the bench, then really, they're taking up space on the team bus, but they're not really helping the team, if that makes any sense.
Right.
And I've never thought about that. I'll use that again somewhere. But you want people involved, but when people feel unworthy, when they feel condemned, which is a tool of sin, they struggle to find value in themselves or to allow anybody else to find value in them.
Absolutely. And I think oftentimes we don't understand the difference maybe between conviction and condemnation, and we allow that condemnation to speak to us when we should be, you said it's a tool of Satan, we should be shutting that out, but we allow that voice to speak. So, let me just take a second here because I got like 3 different lists of questions. So
I understand.
Give me just a second. We've already talked a little bit about unique challenges of pastoring in the 21st century. I think we've probably covered that. I guess what projects are you currently working on?
Well, it's probably like a lot of folks. I've got a lot of projects going, and I have this tendency to get stuff to a certain point, and then my wife's kind of my finisher. She helps me, pushes me over the finish speed because I get tired of fooling with it. Right now, does that sound familiar?
Definitely.
Right now, I'm working on a book I have dealt with and have survived. I don't know that overcome is the right word, but I've dealt with the diagnosis of clinical depression for probably 35 years. And so I'm working on a project that will try to address that. And I started writing some blogs on it. Where is God in my dark place is kind of what the title that I hung on it. And in my conversation with preachers and then in having people reach out to me, I'm going to drag the topic of kicking and screaming into the light of day for we Pentecostals, because we're not willing to address appropriately, in my opinion, address mental health issues. And
absolutely.
If you're depressed, go pray through. If you're depressed, go on a 3-day fast. If you're depressed, where's the joy of the Lord? If you're depressed, you're backslidden. If you're depressed, what's the sin in your life? Well, all of those questions are things that the depressed person asks themselves. And so the church really has not been dispenser of hope in many instances when it comes to depression. And so I'm working on that. I'm probably 60% of the way through with that. I just need to take about a 30-day challenge and finish the thing. I was on a flight yesterday and actually worked on a couple of chapters. I think by the end of June, I'll have it pretty close to go. Secondly, obviously moving our church into the future and preparing it for the future. I recognize that at age, just like the bishop in you guys' church, I'm limited in what I'm going to be able to in getting the church where it needs to be. I am determined I will not be an 80-year-old pastor. I don't think that's healthy for local churches. Matter of fact, I don't plan to even get remotely close to that. So part of my responsibility now is to prepare this church for where it's going. Although kind of like Moses, I won't get to that promised land myself. I may get to it, right, but I won't necessarily experience it. So that's a major thing. And then I'm really intrigued by the idea of taking some of my experience, some of my interest, responding to what I see are pain points in ministry by developing a battery of online training courses that kind of work through the apostolic continuum that I talked about earlier. Some of our preachers come under the influence of very studious men, very studious people who also teach them how to study and how to prepare. And then there are unfortunately other situations where that all a guy knows to do in his preaching and teaching is to take a verse from Genesis and another one from Malachi and another one and kind of makes this amalgamation that has no context.
Right.
And people who are smart, people who are educated, they you can't win them with that. And so I see just some practical stuff that we really need help with at the grassroots level. And so that's an ongoing thing. I've started doing a little video work with that. And then also in that context, about a number of young preachers recently who are entering into their first pastorate. And I again, would like to write or develop some material I would probably call First Church. And it would be focused on the preacher who is entering his first pastorate, because that's a unique season. It's a unique opportunity for a church to turn in a new direction. It's also a unique opportunity for it to blow sky high. And we see both happen at times. So offering some steps of how to do some of that. And then I'm working on a book focused on prayer on men. And of course, almost everything you do is based on stuff that you preached or taught or whatever in some setting. And so that's it. I've got some other deeper projects I want on the road, but and probably some of those are about 80% through. But I just dread getting back to them because they're the kind of stuff that has lots of footnotes and all that stuff that, that you have to be a little more learned than I prefer. I told Brother Bernard one time that learning and writing, and I actually started at the seminary, but I told him my challenge is that I like learning what I want to learn, and I like writing what I want to write. And that doesn't seem to work real well with the seminary professors. They kind of want to direct your learning.
Right.
So anyway, so I do have some projects going.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that I've struggled with. Maybe you're struggling with this too, from what I'm hearing. Starting projects is a lot of fun, and the first so many percent maybe is, but then that last 20 to 40% is drudge.
Yeah, and I experienced that with writing. My books these days, before I send them to a professional editor, go through about 12 rewrites. Now, I don't do that with blog posts. There'll be mistakes in those real often. But, after you've read that thing about 10 times, you're just sick of that. You're so tired of it. And there have been times when I just sent it on to the editor and said, I'm sick of this. Just finish it and get it where it looks as good as it can look. Because the key to it's in the rewrite. And so,
right.
But I have an entrepreneurial bent. So I like doing been done. I see an app in the future for disciple making. Two components. One would be where that the pastor, whoever's leading the discipleship program in the church, could track every new convert. Would basically be a database. And then there would be, as you clicked off where this convert was at, there would be posts that would be sent, or messages that would go, text messages that would go to their phone or to Messenger on Facebook, that would basically be one bite Bible lessons.
That's great.
So again, I won't enough to get everything finished that I'll get started, but that's good too.
Yeah, it's good to always be doing something, I think, even if you know you're not going to finish it or not going to be able to see it yourself. That's good to have that vision.
Yeah. I think I especially like your idea on training young ministers, especially, for the first pastorate, or even the training as equipping them to be a pastor. So I think what's unique about our organization is pastors don't really need to go to Bible school and seminary. They can just, get online and take the ministry classes and follow that plan. And I grew up Baptist who, I actually have a calling to be a pastor. I had it when I was 13 years old. And I've taken, I've been through Bible college and in the Baptist side. And then I became Pentecostal, and just kind of started to develop at that a little bit more.
Well, you will have learned better than many of us the process of the homiletic delivery part, and you'll have gained much insight on how to decipher the text. That's the part that I see. I have a little group that I call Fivefold Training for Ministry in our local. Some of it by Facebook, and then on occasion we meet. Well, I'm trying to teach them how I study, and as I'm working through, say, the book of James, I work through it a paragraph at a time. Well, I want to find out the point of each paragraph. It's very easy in the scripture to get lost in all the supporting detail. Is the point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a little process, and I'm trying to teach them, and then to ask them with word study of the Greek and Hebrew, which I'm not proficient in Greek or Hebrew, but I know where Kenneth Wiest is proficient, and I know where Strong's Concordance is, and I know where Vine's and all of that. So Wilson's words. So, and again, if I think we can go to seed on all of that, because then you have to take what you've learned and and get it where it's relevant to the people in front of you. It's not just spouting off a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. I talked about on my podcast here right now I'm just the sheep, and I fear sometimes that we feed the sheep what we like to eat instead of what the sheep need.
Sure. Yep.
It may well be a guy who is the study of Hebrew traditions and Hebrew ceremonies and knows a smattering of Hebrew words. Well, it becomes the diet to his church, or if it's a 7-lesson series on who Melchizedek was. I think it's all the knobs and whatnots in the tabernacle. Well, there have been myriad on the types and the silver sockets of the tabernacle representing redemption or something. I don't remember what it represented, but everybody's got their own ideas about all that stuff. Well, you just get so immersed in that you don't help people figure out how to balance their checkbook and how to keep from going broke with their budget because they don't have one. So, ministry's got to be practical in order to be effective.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I agree 100%. And I do see that. I've seen where I have a tendency to do that too in teaching. I teach a lot at our adult Bible hour, and a lot of times it tends to be things that I enjoy teaching, maybe more so than what I really should be teaching or what they need to hear.
One of my podcasts, it will have hit just, if we go on with this, we'll have talked about 20 topics that I try to teach or preach on each year. And I actually heard Anthony Mangan talk about that probably 30 years ago, and it got locked into my mind, and I've applied since. And then in reading one of Warren Wiersbe's book on preaching, that's probably where the Mangan got it, because none of us come up with a whole lot original. But again, it gives you, there are things I don't much like. I prefer to deal with something else, but but the congregation needs it, and regularly. So, and when I say regular, I mean a couple of times a year to come back and make and bring those truths back to them in a different way or a fresh way. So again, balance is a good word.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I have to ask one more question, probably selfishly a little bit for myself. If you feel comfortable answering it, I don't know, and I've never been diagnosed with anything, but I do know I have a lot of, and my wife will attest to this, I have a lot of really high highs and a lot of really low lows, and sometimes I'm super excited about whatever I'm doing, and sometimes I couldn't care if I do anything at all. So I'm not sure what that is, but it's a struggle because I have all these projects, and I'm working on a couple of book projects that I whichever one I finish first would be my first book, and if I ever finish one. Thank you. And of course, podcast and a blog and things like that. And I don't know, how do you deal with the pushing through when you don't feel like it? Do you push through when you don't feel like it, or do you just wait?
Well, the wrong thing to do is to just wait. The first thing I would say is there are assessments that probably ask 20 or 30 questions that can help you in those low moments to diagnose kind of what's really going on. And clinical depression is not just having a bad day or two. It's ongoing. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember whether it's 21 days or 30 or whatever, that's just pretty constant and has these certain that are part of life. One of them being that the person just does not enjoy what they usually enjoy, things that have been lifelong habits or lifelong adventures, whether it's going golf or fishing or whatever. They just don't want to do anything. And in depression, the analogy I'll use is it's like you're in a swamp. I was, again, raised in the deep South, central Louisiana, and did a little bit of duck hunting when I was a kid. Well, we have huge lakes there. Catahoula Lake is one of the areas of Louisiana. Well, you can get out on Catahoula Lake or some of the other, and you can wade way out to a duck blind or a little stand of trees that have been flooded. And but then as the sun sets, and you may have a duck or two in hand that trudge back toward the shore. And I'm telling you right now, when you've got waders on that come up and you're trudging through water that's between it and the mud is up to your waist, what going out is a long way going back. But in depression, the bank's never in sight. You're just walking, and you're hoping that at some point I come out of this thing. It's vital to keep walking. It's essential to keep moving.
Right.
I have recently gone through quite a bit of this, and my wife has commented that I seem to, on this occasion, be asserting myself in like this. I'm not just gonna curl up in a fetal position under the bed. And with clinical depression, it's not that a person lost their job. It's not that there's the sorrow of a relationship gone south. It's not the death. It's you can have incredible church, baptize people on Sunday, and on Monday just be absolutely under. And not just under because of the Monday blues from the preachers, but every bit of everything has been expended. And so it takes all the energy, it takes all of the effort, maintain a semblance of normal in public, but then in private, you're just a shell. You're a counselor said one time, somebody I go to for counsel, but he made the observation, because he deals with depression himself. He said it's like bleeding, but nobody knows you're bleeding. And that's, I don't know if I'm helping any or not, but there's some very good resources. Tim LaHaye's books on overcoming depression are very good. LaHaye's now dead, but it's very good. And there's some other stuff. But the first thing I tell people to do is really get a good definition of what it is, and then number two, to do some sort of assessment. What you describe may be a semblance of normal based on your personality, or it may be some component of a bipolar. And again, you'd be bipolar without it being extreme. I pastored people extreme bipolar issues, but I don't think everybody has the same level of that. I can times about that myself, where that it was just too high for the situation. Mm-hmm. So that help any? I don't know if it did or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was what my intuition was. The pushing through, forcing yourself to kind of keep moving is the best.
And there's
option.
times when you just don't have the energy to do that, because again, part of the dynamic of depression is a lack of energy, a lack of a lack of motivation. Again, things that you enjoy doing or have enjoyed doing historically. And so the depression thing is, it's very real. And that's one of the reasons I'm going to write about it, is because I think we have to get this to, as I've and this is in one of the chapters of the book, I've had so many people tell me, and I'm talking about leaders, people whose names you would know, people who are iconic, and say, my wife takes such and such for her depression, but I told you that she'd kill me. And so we're not willing, you can't get better over something that you're not willing to admit exists.
Absolutely.
And so, and unfortunately, if we have that degree of it among how much of it's sitting in the pews? I read a statistic that said on a given Sunday, 25% of the people in the congregation dealing with some dimension of depression. So we got a lot. We got a lot of opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, speaking of practical, you said there needs to be practical applications. People have to be able to apply what you're teaching or preaching. I think that speaks to that right there. Uncomfortable things we don't want to talk about even are very much practical for probably a lot of the congregation.
Yeah, and I think we've missed some of that. We don't want to. We've done a poor job, and not just in Pentecost, but we've collectively done a poor job across the spectrum in dealing with issues of human sexuality. It's just almost spoken of as a negative. Well, God intended it as a gift to humanity, but if all that our young people and young couples ever hear said about sexual relationship is negative, then that becomes the flavoring of even the appropriate relationship. And so again, and I'm not going to tackle that one. I'll leave it to somebody else. Brother Arrowwood, tell him I said that was what he needed to write his next book on.
I'll let him know.
Tell him to have that one done by October when we can sell it at General Conference.
Absolutely.
I'm going to stay in. Maybe that'll be for him or one of you guys.
Oh, I'm out. I'll give that one to Brother Arrowwood. You're right, though. It's one of those things that I actually I have taught in our adult Bible hour at the Tabernacle. I've taught on dealing with homosexuality, because that's something that in my experience growing up in the church, it was you just didn't even talk about it, or it was over that line where it becomes gay bash.
That's what I was fixing to say. That's what you hear
one or the other.
The indictment of the behavior without any redemptive, it just becomes a punchline in somebody's hot sermon. And
right.
It's like I've heard T.F. Tenney say through the years, there's certain things that as a preacher, that if you say them, you're going to get audience response. But is that what we're preaching for?
Absolutely.
Are we just trying to get people to their feet? Are we trying to get an amen? Are we trying to get a hand clap? Or are we trying to plant seeds of change in their life? Not much applause for the seed planter as he works in the farm.
That's true.
It's more, it's kind of grinded out work, I guess, is the way to.
Yeah. And I was privileged. I think I was privileged and blessed when I came to Seymour, because I growing up, I didn't necessarily have the positive influences. I mean, in all honesty, and this is not to reflect badly necessarily on any of my pastors from the past, but some places that I was as a younger person, I dealt with some of the negativity. And coming to Seymour, under Pastor Arrowwood, he's a great teacher, and that was something I desperately needed and didn't necessarily experience in some
Well,
other
and,
churches. So
and
that
Paul's
taught me a lot.
instruction to Timothy was that a leader, and I think the book of Timothy, although it has broad application to the church, it's important to be mindful that it's written from an older preacher to a younger preacher, that leaders were to be apt to teach. And there are those who think that from Ephesians, where it lists the fivefold, actually, the way the Greek puts it, it's the fourfold ministry, because the word pastor and teacher should be applied to the same individual and I think that great churches are built on teaching. You can gather up a pretty good crowd with a concert or Christian comedy or enough noise, but now if you're going to keep people and sustain them through the difficult seasons of life, you're going to have to teach them. Because difficulties coming, and the struggles of life are coming. So how do we cope?
Right.
Well, really do appreciate you taking your time.
I've enjoyed it.
Y'all
Today. Challenged my thinking.
Absolutely. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah. Before we go, though, we just want to think you had a promotion that you wanted to offer, and maybe where best people could reach you.
My website is Carlton Coon Senior, and that's just Carlton Coon, no space, and then sr.com. And I never know what the people are going to have as the landing page, but if you get past the landing page, you can search for the blog post and then the resources that are available there, both for discipleship and Christian living and evangelism. I'm excited about my project is a Bible study, what the Bible says, that is topical, that has 7 lessons, and it has been used incredibly already. And then on Facebook, Carlton Coon Senior would be the spot, and I use LinkedIn and stuff. For your listeners, number one, and I sent this link to you guys, just a free lesson from what the Bible says that your listeners can just look at. And second offer that I have for them is a third off on a bundle of 4 of my books, 4 books. I better stuff. I'm like you. I've got more things moving around here than one's the daily things of Christian living. The other is questions Pentecostal preachers ask. Third is masterful preaching, which is about how to preach evangelistic to sinners. And then the fourth, I don't remember. So anyway, but they're normally $72. I think they're $48 on the website for your folks. So again, but they can look me up, carltoncoonsenior.com, and pretty regular. Well, as a matter of fact, I do that weekly ministry Monday. It's on the page and then on YouTube, and we just turned it into a podcast too. So, and it's interesting, like you have observed with your work, it's interesting, the broad array of people who listen. And I think it reflects, I stuff. It's not that I'm opposed to anybody watching stuff, but I listen to stuff riding in the car. I listen to stuff mowing. Right. I listen to stuff, doing other things, but just sitting down watching a video, unless it's the only way to get somebody's delivering, I am not doing it. I'll read a book, right, or I'll listen to the podcast, or listen to a book on tape.
Yeah.
Audio book, I guess would be the term now, but I am not going to watch a video. And I think there's a lot of people like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said earlier, we're so busy, maybe overcommitted, but it's easy to put your earbuds in and listen to a podcast or an audiobook.
I like it. Challenges my thinking.
I do too.
Wow, what a great episode that was. it was such a pleasure and a wonderful experience to have Brother Carlton Coon on the podcast. He was a tremendous guest and very gracious and kind to allow both Jareth and I to speak with him. And it was just such a great joy to hear his wisdom and be able to reflect on what he said. I hope that all of you guys enjoyed that as well. I also just want to apologize to Brother Carlton Coon for the timeliness of the release of this episode. We did record this earlier in 2018, and we, as you know, if you listen to episode 0, Jareth and I had some major life changes, and we had to put the podcast on hold. But we're back, and it's 2019. It's exciting. It's a new year. As I'm recording this, it's actually January 1. So it really is the new year. And two Pentecostals and a microphone are super excited to be back. And we can't wait to just keep releasing new episodes. We have a lot of great ideas and great things in store for you. And hopefully some really good interviews lined up. We will let you guys know of the details of that as soon as we can. And look forward to releasing new episodes, hopefully pretty consistently. So, and I just want to thank all of you, all of our listeners who stuck around, who waited patiently to no avail, it seemed like. But we're back and we're excited. So I hope that you guys stuck around and we didn't disappoint you too much. And as we're moving forward, we hope that you continue to listen to us. As always, we really do appreciate all of your feedback. We take it to heart, and the good and the bad. So, and it just helps us to be better and improve and get better content out to you and what you guys want to hear. And with that being said, we would love to hear from you. If you have episode ideas or any suggestions, we'll gladly take them. You can reach out to us via our Facebook, our Twitter account, our Instagram, our even iTunes. Leave a review on iTunes. It only helps us if you give us a 5-star rating. Anyway, I'm just kidding. But we do really appreciate all of your feedback. And reach out to Carlton Coon. I'm sure he would love to hear from you. If you have questions about this episode or any other of his various ministries, I'm sure he would love to speak with you. Thank you again for listening, and thank you again for sticking around for two Pentecostals and a microphone.